Royal Marine officer, shocked the king's guards with unexpected visits. His reputation as a Royal Marine officer was known across the country, not just for his courage in battle, but for his surprising ability to think differently. Many called him unorthodox, some even called him reckless, but his results always spoke louder than any criticism. Today, however, his attention was not on a battlefield or a training ground, it was on the palace. The palace had stood for centuries, its walls rich with history and tradition. Golden gates guarded the entrance, and the king's guards, resplendent in their polished uniforms and stiff posture, stood at precise intervals. They were trained to notice the slightest disruption and to act immediately. And yet Captain Harrington approached without a formal announcement, as if the very air around him carried authority. The first guard to notice him stiffened. "Halt! State your business," he called, his voice echoing against the high stone walls. Harrington stopped a few paces away, his eyes calm but intense. "I am Captain James Harrington, Royal Marine. I request entry to the palace," he said clearly, his tone carrying both respect and certainty. The guard frowned, glancing at his companions. Protocol did not allow any visitor, even a military officer, to approach without prior notice. "You need clearance, Captain. No one enters without approval." Harrington smiled faintly. "I understand, but today I ask for your trust instead. I have a matter of importance to discuss with the king himself. Please allow me passage." The guards exchanged uneasy glances. His confidence was unsettling. Normally, they could handle intruders with strict rules, but this man seemed different. There was no arrogance, no threat, only a calm authority that seemed to radiate from him. One of the senior guards, a man named Sir Rowland, stepped forward. He had served the palace for over 20 years and had seen all sorts of visitors, from diplomats to troublemakers. "Captain, the king does not see anyone without proper notice. You must follow the process like everyone else," he said firmly. Harrington inclined his head slightly, almost in acknowledgement, but he did not step back. "I respect your duty, Sir Rowland. And I respect the king's time. But sometimes protocol alone cannot solve what needs solving. I only ask that you observe and allow me a moment." Sir Rowland studied him. He noticed something unusual in Harrington's demeanor, a blend of discipline, intelligence, and quiet confidence. The kind of person who had walked through dangerous situations countless times and emerged unscathed. Something told Sir Rowland that this was not a man to be dismissed lightly. "Very well," Sir Rowland said finally, after a long pause. "You may enter, but I will accompany you. Any deviation from rules and you will be removed immediately." Harrington nodded respectfully. "I would expect nothing less." As they walked through the palace gates, Harrington observed everything. The cobblestone paths gleamed in the sunlight, the palace gardens stretched in immaculate patterns, and the walls were adorned with banners that told the kingdom's story. Harrington was not just seeing the palace, he was studying it. Every guard's movement, every opening in the gates, every point of attention, it all mattered to him. The guards around him whispered among themselves. Some admired his confidence, while others were clearly uncomfortable. No visitor had ever approached the palace like this. Normally, visitors followed strict schedules, polite and cautious. Harrington was a storm of calm energy, moving with purpose but without haste. When they reached the main courtyard, Harrington paused, taking a moment to look around. His sharp eyes noted details others might miss. A guard stance slightly off, a gate hinge that creaked, the shadow of a tree falling perfectly across a narrow corridor. Every small observation mattered. In his experience, even minor details could become critical. Sir Rowland watched him with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "Captain," he said cautiously, "are you here on some secret mission, or is this personal?" Harrington smiled faintly. "You could say it is both, but more importantly, I am here to observe and understand. The palace, its defenses, its people, I only wish to gain perspective. And if I am fortunate, perhaps I can offer insight that even the king may find useful." The other guards looked at him incredulously. Insight? Into the king's palace? Who was this man, and why did he act so boldly? Harrington continued through the courtyard, greeting the staff politely but confidently. He did not rush, but neither did he linger unnecessarily. There was a rhythm to his movements, a balance between urgency and patience. It was clear that he was not there to cause trouble. He was there to accomplish something greater. At one point, a young page approached, carrying a message. "Sir, you must not go further without permission," the page said nervously, glancing at the towering figure behind him. Harrington bent slightly and smiled reassuringly. "Young man, thank you. I mean no harm. I only seek a moment with the king." The page hesitated, then nodded. "Very well, sir. I will inform the palace staff." As they walked further, Harrington noticed the guards starting to relax slightly. His demeanor had a strange effect. It commanded respect without fear, authority without force. Even the most rigid of the king's guards began to feel that perhaps this visit was different from anything they had experienced before. Finally, they reached the grand hall where visitors were usually received. The guards formed a tight line, signaling to the other palace staff that something unusual was underway. Harrington stopped just outside the hall, turning to Sir Rowland. "Sir Rowland, thank you for allowing me this passage," he said earnestly. "I promise that I will not overstep boundaries, and I will leave as soon as my purpose is fulfilled. My only intent is to offer knowledge and perspective." Sir Rowland studied him for a long moment. Then, with a slight nod, he opened the doors to the hall. "You may proceed. But remember, Captain, the eyes of the palace are everywhere. Do not mistake courtesy for weakness." Harrington's eyes sparkled with appreciation. "I understand completely." As he stepped into the hall, he felt the weight of history around him. Portraits of past kings and queens lined the walls, each painting a reminder of the palace's centuries-old legacy. The marble floors reflected the sunlight streaming through stained glass windows, creating patterns of color that danced around him. It was a place of tradition, power, and discipline. But to Harrington, it was also a place full of potential. He walked slowly, observing every detail: the positioning of the guards, the flow of staff, the subtle signals that indicated alertness or distraction. Every detail told a story, and Harrington was a reader of stories. As he reached the center of the hall, he paused for a moment. Though no one spoke yet, a quiet tension filled the air. Everyone sensed that this visit would not be ordinary. Harrington's reputation had preceded him, and the mere presence of a man like him could shift the dynamics of the palace, if only slightly. At that moment, he realized that his first goal had already been achieved. He had captured attention. And in his line of work, attention was the first step toward change, toward influence, and toward action. Harrington smiled faintly to himself. This was only the beginning. The palace gardens were unlike anything Captain James Harrington had ever seen. They stretched like a living tapestry, with neatly trimmed hedges, fountains that danced with sunlight, and flowers in every color imaginable. Birds sang softly in the trees, their songs blending with the gentle rustle of leaves. It was serene, almost magical, yet Harrington noticed it was carefully controlled. Every branch, every path, every stone placed deliberately. Sir Rowland followed closely behind, his arms crossed, his eyes scanning Harrington like a hawk. "The king spends much of his time here," Rowland said, his voice low. "Few visitors are allowed this far. The gardens are as much a part of the palace as the walls themselves." Harrington nodded, taking in the surroundings. "I understand," he said quietly, but his eyes were already analyzing every detail. The placement of guards, the ways to approach the palace from different angles, the patterns of shadows that could hide someone if needed. It was not about intrusion, it was about observation. Every environment had a story, and Harrington had learned to read them all. The first guard stationed near the garden fountain stepped forward, his posture rigid. "Captain Harrington," he said, trying to hide the surprise in his voice, "you should not be here without permission." "This area is private," Harrington smiled gently. "I mean no harm. I only wish to understand how the palace operates, how its people move, and how the guards protect what is most valuable. Knowledge is never a threat when it is paired with respect." The guard hesitated. There was something in Harrington's calm, measured tone that made it difficult to argue. Usually, intruders or even overconfident officers were quick to anger or impatience. Harrington was neither. He commanded respect, simply by being present, simply by being confident without demanding it. As they moved deeper into the gardens, a group of gardeners paused, whispering among themselves. Some recognized Harrington from his military accomplishments, though most did not understand why a man of such stature was wandering freely through the palace grounds. Harrington acknowledged them with a nod, friendly but composed. He did not stop. He was here with a purpose. The garden paths led them to a small pavilion at the center. From there, one could see nearly the entire palace courtyard, the surrounding walls, and the distant mountains that framed the kingdom. Harrington paused, letting his eyes sweep over the panorama. He was not admiring it merely for beauty. He was taking mental notes, thinking about angles, sightlines, and vulnerabilities. Sir Roland watched him carefully. "You study everything as if you were planning an attack," he remarked dryly. "Is that your habit, even in a place like this?" Harrington turned to him with a half-smile. "Observation is the first step in understanding. Understanding is the first step in improvement, nothing more." The senior guard frowned but said nothing. Harrington had a way of speaking that made it hard to argue without seeming foolish. That alone unsettled many people, but the effect was subtle. As they walked further, a young guard approached with a message. "Sir Roland, the king is aware of your guest. He wishes to observe him from the palace balcony first," the young man said. "He has not yet granted permission for a private audience." Harrington nodded politely. "Then we will be seen, but not intrusive. Let him watch and let him judge for himself." The group moved toward a raised terrace overlooking the main palace building. From here, the king could observe without being approached directly. Harrington's eyes, however, were drawn to the guards around him. He watched their movements, the way they signaled to each other, the patterns of attention and alertness. Even the most disciplined guards had moments of predictability. That knowledge, Harrington thought, could be invaluable, not for harm, but for understanding human nature and improving efficiency. One of the younger guards, clearly unsettled, stepped forward nervously. "Sir, how do you move so confidently among us without concern?" he asked, his voice betraying a mix of curiosity and unease. Harrington paused, considering the question carefully. "Confidence is not the absence of caution," he replied. "It is the ability to trust yourself to make the right decision when the time comes. I am always cautious, always aware, but I do not let fear control my actions. That is the difference." The young guard stared at him, trying to absorb the words. They were not just words. There was a quiet authority in Harrington's voice that carried experience, wisdom, and the weight of countless real-life situations where quick thinking had saved lives. Harrington continued through the garden, now approaching a smaller, private fountain surrounded by carved stone benches. Here, he noticed the guards' formation subtly shifting. They were beginning to relax, but only slightly. Respect was growing in the air like an invisible current, and Harrington sensed it. He stopped by the fountain and looked at the water, observing its clarity and movement. "Even here," he said softly to Sir Roland, "the palace shows its strength. But there is always room for improvement. Every system, no matter how well planned, can be refined." Sir Roland gave a slight shake of his head, a mix of admiration and disbelief. "You speak like you know secrets no one else has ever seen, and yet you are right." Harrington smiled faintly, letting the moment linger. Sometimes, the simplest observations revealed more than strict rules ever could. The path led them to a quiet corner of the garden, where a small grove of trees created natural shade. Birds chirped, sunlight filtered through leaves, and the air smelled faintly of jasmine. Harrington moved slowly, his eyes still scanning every detail. Even here, subtle weaknesses could be found: slightly uneven stone steps, small gaps in fencing, a guard distracted by a distant noise. None of these were dangerous, but noting them was part of understanding. A female palace staff member approached with some trays of refreshments. She looked at Harrington nervously, unsure how to act. Harrington smiled warmly. "Thank you, madam. I appreciate your work. The palace runs smoothly because of people like you, not just because of guards or walls." Her face relaxed and she nodded. "You are kind to notice. Most only focus on rules and hierarchy." Harrington's attention returned to Sir Roland. "Kindness is part of leadership," he said quietly. "A place cannot be strong if it neglects the human element. Respect, understanding, and care, these are as important as discipline." Sir Roland's eyebrows rose slightly. Harrington's perspective was unusual for someone of the military, and yet it made sense. It was not just strength or rules that kept the palace safe. It was the balance between people, environment, and vigilance. As they walked back toward the main paths, Harrington noticed a small child playing near the fountain, laughing without fear. Guards glanced nervously, but Harrington merely smiled. "A place is only as secure as the people feel safe," he said. "Fear may protect for a moment, but trust protects forever." Sir Roland said nothing, but he could not hide a small smile. The younger guards around them were whispering now, clearly influenced by Harrington's calm yet commanding presence. By the time they reached the edge of the garden closest to the palace walls, the king's eyes had been observing the entire time from the balcony. Harrington's demeanor, his methodical movements, and his respectful engagement with the staff had made a subtle impression. The guards who had once been skeptical were now intrigued. They had begun to see that there was more to this officer than a disregard for protocol. There was intelligence, insight, and an ability to inspire confidence. Harrington paused briefly, looking back over the garden one last time. The sunlight illuminated the vibrant flowers, the stone pathways, and the fountains, making everything appear almost ethereal. To an ordinary visitor, it was a beautiful space. To Harrington, it was a living system, full of details to understand and appreciate. Sir Roland finally spoke, a note of respect in his voice. "Captain, you move through this palace as if it belongs to you, yet you show respect for every corner. Most men would either command it or fear it. You do neither." Harrington turned to him with a small, genuine smile. "I neither command nor fear. I observe, learn, and when necessary, improve. That is all." For a moment the palace seemed to hold its breath. The guards, the staff, even the distant king on the balcony seemed to sense that Harrington was not just a visitor. He was a presence, a force of calm authority and insight that was difficult to ignore. As they prepared to leave the garden, Harrington's mind was already moving forward. This visit was more than an exercise in observation. It was a subtle lesson, a demonstration of how calm, intelligence, and respect could influence even the most rigid of systems. He had seen the guards' reactions, noted their strengths and weaknesses, and begun to shape an understanding that could benefit the palace greatly. He stepped through the last archway, pausing to glance back at the garden one final time. The sunlight glinted off the fountains, the flowers swayed gently in the breeze, and the palace stood majestic as ever. But Harrington saw more than beauty. He saw potential. And he knew that this was only the beginning. Captain James Harrington had already left a lasting impression on the palace staff and guards with his calm authority and respectful observation. Yet, even as he moved through the palace halls, he could sense the air of curiosity turning into something more deliberate. The king's guards had begun to discuss among themselves what to do about this unusual visitor. Their skepticism was slowly turning into cautious intrigue, and some of the senior officers quietly suggested that Harrington be tested. It was not meant to be hostile. Rather, it was a series of challenges to see if the man who had walked so boldly through the palace truly had the skill and intelligence that he appeared to possess. Harrington welcomed it. He understood the value of tests. They revealed strengths, weaknesses, and character in a way that words alone never could. The first test came in the form of a security drill. A group of guards, led by Sir Roland, set up a mock scenario in the outer courtyard. The exercise was simple in concept. A threat would appear at a random entrance, and Harrington would have to detect it and respond accordingly. Yet the courtyard was large, the paths confusing, and the guards skilled at hiding any movement. Harrington watched carefully as the drill began. He did not rush. His eyes moved in precise patterns, observing the angles of approach, the way shadows fell across the courtyard, and the smallest shifts in the guards' movements. Within moments, he spotted a young guard pretending to be an intruder. Harrington did not call out immediately. Instead, he waited for the right moment, then calmly intercepted the intruder, guiding him to the center of the courtyard. The observing guards nodded silently, impressed. Harrington had seen what they wanted him to see, but in his own way. It was not merely about reacting. It was about understanding the situation, predicting the movements, and responding with precision. The next challenge was a test of agility and strength. Harrington was led to a training ground where various obstacles had been set up: ropes, walls, and narrow beams. The guards expected him to perform well physically. He was, after all, a Royal Marine officer. But Harrington moved differently from what they anticipated. He was not just fast or strong, he was strategic. Each leap over a wall, each swing on a rope, was executed with a careful assessment of balance and momentum. A few of the younger guards tried to keep up, but it became clear that Harrington's experience and discipline gave him an advantage far beyond physical ability. Sir Roland, watching from the side, could not hide his admiration. "He is precise, yet effortless," he murmured. "This is not raw power, it is controlled skill." After the obstacle course, Harrington was led into a room designed to test his decision-making under pressure. The scenario was simple but clever. Several guards posed as intruders inside the hall, while others acted as hostages. Harrington had to neutralize the threat and ensure the safety of everyone in the room. He entered calmly, analyzing the positions of the guards and hostages. He did not act recklessly. Instead, he used his knowledge of angles, movement, and psychology to direct the situation. In a few precise moves, he secured the hostages and caught the disguised guards. The observers were silent for a moment, absorbing the efficiency and intelligence of his actions. "This is remarkable," said one of the senior guards quietly. "Most men would panic or act too quickly, but he remains composed and methodical." Harrington looked at the assembled guards and smiled faintly. "Every situation can be understood," he said simply. "The key is to remain calm, observe carefully, and respond with clarity. Haste or anger never helps." By the afternoon, the palace staff had gathered near the courtyard to watch the final challenge, a test of strategy and foresight. The guards created a scenario in which Harrington had to defend a key entry point while anticipating multiple approaches by imaginary attackers. It was a simulation of an actual threat, designed to see how he would respond in real time. Harrington studied the scene carefully. He could see patterns in the guards' actions, weaknesses in the formation, and opportunities to improve efficiency. Without raising his voice or making sudden movements, he repositioned himself and the guards subtly, demonstrating how small adjustments could have a large impact. The simulated attack began, and Harrington directed the movements like a conductor leading an orchestra. The results were remarkable. Every simulated intruder was intercepted, every entry point secured. The guards who had initially doubted him now looked at him with a mix of awe and respect. Harrington had proven not only his physical skill and sharp mind, but also his ability to lead without dominating. He had earned trust through observation, action, and insight. Sir Rowland approached him afterward. "Captain Harrington, you have exceeded all expectations. Not only have you demonstrated skill and intelligence, but you have also taught us something valuable. Discipline alone is not enough. Insight and calm reasoning are equally important." Harrington inclined his head respectfully. "I am honored, Sir Rowland, but it is not just about skill. It is about understanding people, systems, and situations. Every guard, every staff member, every detail has a purpose. When those elements work together, the palace can achieve true security and efficiency." The younger guards, who had been skeptical at first, now approached Harrington with questions. "Sir," one asked, "how did you know what to do before anything happened?" Harrington smiled gently. "Experience teaches you patterns. Observation teaches you context. When combined, they allow you to anticipate what is coming. But it is also about patience. You cannot rush understanding. You must see the whole picture." Another guard, more timid, asked, "And what about fear? Don't you feel fear in dangerous situations?" Harrington looked at him seriously. "Fear is natural and it can protect you, but fear should never control your actions. When you understand the situation and trust your abilities, you can act even in the presence of fear. That is courage, acting wisely despite fear, not the absence of it." The palace staff, who had watched from a distance, were equally impressed. Harrington had not only completed the challenges but had done so with respect and composure. He had earned admiration not through arrogance, but through demonstration of skill, insight, and leadership. Later, Sir Rowland gathered the guards. "We have underestimated this man," he said frankly. "Not because he is unworthy of trust, but because we are not used to someone who moves so freely among us while still respecting our roles. Captain Harrington has shown us what true leadership looks like." Harrington listened quietly, not seeking praise, but he felt a quiet satisfaction. The tests had been challenging, but they had also served their purpose: to build trust, demonstrate capability, and show the guards that rules and tradition could be complemented by intelligence, insight, and calm reasoning. As the sun began to set over the palace, Harrington took a moment to walk alone along the quiet stone paths. The golden light highlighted the architecture, the gardens, and the careful movements of the guards. It was a moment of reflection. He had faced tests designed to challenge him in every way, physically, mentally, and socially. And he had passed not because he was the strongest or the fastest, but because he had prepared, observed, and acted with understanding. He knew that the next step in his journey would be different. The king himself had now taken notice. Harrington's reputation, his presence, and his unusual approach had caught the attention of the most powerful man in the kingdom. The challenges had served their purpose. They had proven his worth and opened a door for the next phase of influence. Yet Harrington also understood that trust must be earned, not assumed. While he had gained respect, he had not yet earned the king's full confidence. That would require patience, insight, and perhaps a display of wisdom beyond the tests of skill. He was ready. By the time the courtyard emptied and the guards returned to their posts, Harrington stood quietly, watching the palace lights reflect on the polished stones. His mind was already working on the next steps, thinking ahead, anticipating challenges, and planning how to continue gaining trust and understanding within the palace walls. The events of the day had proven one thing clearly: tradition and protocol had their place, but adaptability, intelligence, and calm reasoning could achieve far more. Harrington had shown that lessons could be taught not only through orders, but through example, observation, and insight. As he prepared to leave the courtyard for the evening, Harrington felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. The palace had tested him, and he had passed. More importantly, he had demonstrated a new way of thinking, one that would stay with the guards and staff long after he had gone. This was more than a victory of skill. It was a subtle shift in understanding. And Harrington knew that the journey was only beginning. The air inside the palace hall felt heavier than usual as Captain James Harrington was led forward. The vast corridors, lined with ornate tapestries and golden chandeliers, reflected centuries of tradition, power, and responsibility. Every footstep echoed softly against the polished marble, a reminder of the silent history that lingered in these walls. Harrington walked calmly, his posture upright, his eyes observing every detail, not out of suspicion, but out of habit. A man trained to notice everything could not help but see it all. Sir Roland, who had accompanied him through every step so far, stopped at a large set of doors guarded by 2 soldiers. "The king awaits," he said, his tone steady but carrying a note of caution. "Remember, Captain, the king is wise and perceptive. Approach him with respect, but do not let yourself be intimidated. He will test you in his own way." Harrington nodded quietly. He understood well. Respect did not mean subservience, and courage did not mean recklessness. He had faced countless challenges before, but a direct audience with a king demanded both tact and presence. The doors opened slowly, revealing a grand room bathed in warm sunlight that poured through towering windows. The king sat upon a throne that gleamed with gold and velvet, his posture regal yet relaxed. His eyes were sharp, observing Harrington with a mixture of curiosity and authority. Guards stood in formation around the room, their expressions disciplined but alert. Harrington's presence, calm and composed, seemed to ripple through the hall. The king's voice broke the silence. "Captain Harrington, you have made quite an impression within these walls. The guards speak highly of your actions, and yet I must understand why a man of your stature would arrive unannounced at my palace." Harrington bowed slightly, maintaining eye contact. "Your Majesty, I come with respect for your position and for your palace. My intent is not to disrupt, but to observe, learn, and offer insight where it may be useful. I believe every system, every palace, every group of people can benefit from careful observation and understanding." The king leaned back slightly, studying him. "And what makes you think you are qualified to offer insight to the king?" Harrington remained composed. "Experience, Your Majesty, observation, discipline, and a deep respect for systems and the people within them. I have spent my life assessing situations, understanding patterns, and making decisions that preserve life and strengthen order. I offer the same approach here, with no intention beyond the betterment of the palace and its people." The king's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in evaluation. "Many would call such boldness arrogance," he said. "Yet, the guards describe you as calm, disciplined, and precise. How do you balance confidence with respect?" Harrington took a steady breath. "Confidence comes from preparation, Your Majesty. Respect comes from understanding that power is not for dominance but for service. When you lead wisely, both are required: confidence to act and respect for those around you. One without the other leads to failure." For a moment, silence filled the room. The guards watched intently, curious to see how the king would respond. Harrington stood firm, neither too proud nor too humble. There was a quiet authority in his presence, a sense that he had walked through challenges far greater than this hall and emerged with clarity. The king gestured for him to approach. "Walk with me," he said. Harrington obeyed, following the king along the polished floor. The sunlight highlighted the intricate patterns of the marble beneath their feet. "Tell me, Captain, why did you choose to approach my palace in this manner? Why not follow protocol like every other visitor?" Harrington's gaze remained steady. "Your Majesty, I understand the value of protocol. Yet, there are moments when strict adherence can prevent observation, slow insight, and limit perspective. I came to see, understand, and demonstrate that respect and preparation can achieve more than rigid procedure alone." My actions were guided by discipline, not recklessness. The king nodded slowly, as if weighing each word carefully. You are bold, he said, almost as a statement to himself. Boldness can be dangerous, but so can hesitation. Harrington's response was calm. Yes, your majesty. But boldness without preparation is reckless. Boldness with understanding becomes strategy. I do not act without thought, and I do not seek recognition. My intent is to ensure that the palace, its guards, and its people operate at their best potential. The king's eyes softened slightly, revealing a hint of approval. Your words carry weight, Captain Harrington, and your actions within my palace, calm, measured, and precise, confirm what you say. But there is another test, one that cannot be measured by drills or observation alone. Tell me, what would you do if faced with a situation where the rules you have learned conflict with the immediate need to protect my palace? Harrington paused briefly, considering the question carefully. Your Majesty, rules are important. They maintain order and clarity. But in moments of immediate danger, understanding and action must take precedence. One cannot adhere blindly to rules if it means allowing harm to occur. The key is to balance respect for rules with the courage to act wisely when circumstances demand it. The king leaned forward slightly, his interest evident. And would you act against your own judgment if the safety of the palace required it? Harrington met the king's gaze unwaveringly. If the goal is to preserve life and maintain order, I would act decisively, using every skill, every observation, and every ounce of training I possess. Yet I would do so with care, ensuring that respect and discipline remain integral to my actions. A moment of silence followed. The king studied Harrington, then spoke with a tone that was both approving and measured. You are not merely a man of action, he said. You are a man of thought. You understand that true strength comes not from force alone, but from knowledge, respect, and calculated action. Many come to my palace seeking favor or recognition, but you come to serve and to teach, without demanding acknowledgement. Harrington bowed slightly. It is my honor to serve in any way that benefits the palace and your Majesty's people. Recognition is not my goal. Understanding and improvement are. The king gestured to a nearby table. Sit with me, Captain. Let us speak freely. Harrington took a seat across from the king, and the room seemed to settle into a quiet rhythm. The guards remained attentive but respectful, sensing that this conversation was unlike any other. Tell me, the king began, what do you observe about this palace that others might miss? Speak freely. Harrington considered carefully. Your Majesty, the palace is secure, disciplined, and well-maintained. The guards are loyal and highly trained. Yet, even in the best systems, small details can reveal opportunities for improvement. Slight gaps in coordination, moments of distraction, and predictable patterns could be refined for greater efficiency. My goal would be to strengthen what is already strong without disrupting the order or respect that maintains it. The king leaned back, impressed. Most would not speak so candidly. They would either flatter or criticize without understanding. You, Captain, balance honesty with wisdom. Harrington nodded. I speak what I observe, Your Majesty. Every system, no matter how well run, has potential for growth. The key is not to undermine it, but to enhance it carefully and respectfully. The king smiled faintly, his eyes thoughtful. I can see why my guards were both surprised and impressed by you. You do not seek to dominate, yet you command respect. You do not boast, yet your presence leaves an impact. Tell me, Captain, what is the ultimate lesson you wish to convey to those who serve within my palace? Harrington's voice was steady, carrying both conviction and humility. That strength is not only in rules or discipline, but in understanding. That leadership is not in fear, but in respect and example. That courage is not in recklessness, but in thoughtful, decisive action. And that every person, guard, staff, or citizen, plays a role in creating a safe and thriving environment. When each element works in harmony, the palace and its people flourish. The king nodded slowly. Wise words. I believe your visit here has already achieved more than many formal inspections could. You have demonstrated not only skill and intelligence, but the ability to inspire respect and reflection. Harrington inclined his head respectfully. It is my honor to serve in this capacity, Your Majesty, in any way that benefits the palace, its guards, and the people within it. The king studied him for a moment, then spoke decisively. Captain Harrington, you have earned my respect. Your insight, composure, and understanding are remarkable. I believe the palace can benefit greatly from your perspective, and I wish for you to continue your work here in a manner that supports and strengthens all who serve within these walls. Harrington bowed once again, feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment. Thank you, Your Majesty. I will serve faithfully and with diligence. As he rose to leave the room, the king added, Remember, Captain, it is not just about what you do, but how you inspire others to think, to act, and to understand. That is true leadership. Harrington nodded, understanding fully. His mission had shifted from observation and demonstration to guidance and subtle influence. The challenges, the tests, and the audience had all served a purpose: to establish trust, respect, and the opportunity to make a lasting difference. As he walked back through the corridors, Harrington felt a renewed sense of purpose. The palace, its people, and its guards were not merely subjects of study. They were partners in a mission to create harmony, discipline, and understanding. His work was only beginning, but the foundation had been laid. The king's words echoed in his mind. True leadership is not in power, but in the ability to inspire understanding, respect, and courage. Harrington smiled faintly, knowing that the next steps would challenge him in new ways, but also knowing that he was ready. Captain James Harrington had spent days moving through the palace, observing, guiding, and demonstrating his unique approach to leadership. The guards had tested him, the staff had watched him, and finally the king had acknowledged his wisdom and insight. Now it was time for the next step, leaving the palace but leaving a lasting impression. The morning air was crisp as Harrington walked through the outer courtyard. The sun glinted off the polished stones, and the gardens behind him sparkled with dew. The palace, majestic and commanding, seemed almost alive with the rhythm of its inhabitants. Guards stood at attention, yet this morning there was a subtle difference. Their posture was the same, disciplined and precise, but their eyes held something new: respect, curiosity, and even inspiration. Harrington paused for a moment, letting his gaze sweep across the courtyard. He had come to this place unannounced, daring to move beyond protocol and expectation. Now, as he prepared to leave, he felt a quiet satisfaction. His presence had changed something, even if only subtly. Sir Rowland approached him, his expression thoughtful. Captain Harrington, he said, I have served in this palace for over 20 years, and I have seen countless visitors, soldiers, diplomats, scholars, but none have left an impression quite like yours. Even those who doubted you now speak of your insight and calm authority. Harrington smiled faintly. Thank you, Sir Rowland. My goal was never to impress, but to understand, guide, and inspire. It is the palace, its guards, and its people who have made this experience meaningful. The younger guards gathered nearby, some nervously, others boldly. One stepped forward, speaking with a voice that held both curiosity and admiration. Sir, will we ever see someone like you again? Someone who can lead with both strength and understanding? Harrington looked at him kindly. You already have it within you. Courage, discipline, and insight are not unique to one person. They are built through observation, practice, and respect. Every guard here has the potential to lead, to inspire, and to act wisely when the time comes. The guards listened intently. They had been tested, observed, and taught, often without realizing it. Harrington had not demanded obedience or recognition, yet he had planted seeds of knowledge that would grow over time. The young officer felt a quiet hope that their future actions might reflect what they had learned from him. Harrington moved toward the main gates, his steps measured and confident. Along the way, he paused to speak with the palace staff, the gardeners, the pages, the cooks, acknowledging their work and dedication. "Your diligence makes this palace more than walls and stones," he said softly. "It makes it a home, a place of trust and safety. Never underestimate the importance of your efforts." Each person smiled, grateful for his recognition. His words were simple yet meaningful. They carried a quiet truth, that every individual mattered, that every role contributed to the harmony and security of the palace. Harrington had shown them that respect and attention were as powerful as authority and discipline. As he approached the gates, Sir Roland fell into step beside him. "Captain, what will you do now?" he asked quietly. "Your presence has changed much here, but the palace must continue. Will you return to your duties or will you seek another path?" Harrington considered for a moment. "My duty as a Royal Marine continues, but the lessons here will remain. I have learned much, and I hope that the palace, its guards, and its people have learned something as well. That is all the reward I seek." The gates opened, and a gentle breeze swept through the courtyard. Harrington paused at the threshold, looking back one last time at the palace. The sun illuminated the towers and walls, highlighting the careful order and beauty of the place. It was a reminder that every system, every structure, every individual contributed to something greater than themselves. The guards lined the path, standing at attention. Yet their eyes held something different than before: confidence, curiosity, and an unspoken sense of respect. They had been tested, guided, and inspired by Harrington's presence, and though he was leaving, his influence would remain. A young guard stepped forward, nervously holding a small emblem. "Sir, please accept this," he said, offering it with both reverence and sincerity. "It is a symbol of our gratitude and respect for your guidance." Harrington accepted it with a nod and a quiet smile. "Thank you. Symbols are meaningful, but the true value lies in how you act and what you carry within yourselves. Remember that courage, wisdom, and respect are more powerful than any emblem." As he walked beyond the gates, the palace behind him seemed to breathe with a quiet life. The gardens glistened in the morning sun, the fountains shimmered, and the guards returned to their duties with a new sense of purpose. Harrington knew that he had left a mark, not through force or command, but through calm authority, insight, and the ability to inspire. On the road leading away from the palace, Harrington reflected on the journey. He had come unannounced, daring to challenge tradition without disrespect, and in doing so, he had shown that understanding and wisdom could achieve more than rigid rules alone. He had tested the guards, guided them, and in some way prepared the palace for the future. The lessons he had shared were subtle, yet powerful. He had demonstrated that discipline alone was not enough. Insight and calm reasoning were equally important. He had shown that leadership was not measured by power or authority, but by the ability to inspire trust, respect, and thoughtful action. As the path wound through the fields outside the palace, Harrington's thoughts turned to the future. The palace was strong, its guards loyal and skilled, and its people dedicated. Yet there was always room for growth, understanding, and refinement. The work of guidance was never complete, and Harrington had learned that true influence came not from being present, but from planting seeds that others could nurture. By the time he reached the outskirts of the kingdom, Harrington felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The palace behind him stood majestic and secure, a place of tradition and strength. But more importantly, it was a place that had begun to embrace a subtle, lasting change. The guards and staff would carry the lessons forward, making decisions guided by observation, understanding, and respect. Harrington paused one final time, looking back toward the distant towers. "Farewell," he whispered softly, not to the palace itself, but to the people who lived and worked within it. "May you continue to grow, to learn, and to act with courage and wisdom." The road ahead was long, and the life of a Royal Marine offered many challenges yet to face. But Harrington knew that the impact he had left on the palace would endure, not through fear, not through authority alone, but through insight, respect, and calm leadership. That, he realized, was the true measure of success. As he continued his journey, the story of his visit spread quietly throughout the kingdom. The guards who had doubted him now spoke of his guidance with admiration. The palace staff carried forward the lessons of patience, observation, and respect. Even the king, watching from the balcony that morning, had begun to implement subtle changes inspired by Harrington's perspective. Harrington's legacy was not in titles, emblems, or recognition. It was in the minds and hearts of those he had encountered. The lessons he had shared, the respect he had earned, and the inspiration he had provided would continue to influence the palace for years to come. And though he was gone from the palace gates, Captain James Harrington left a quiet but lasting truth. Leadership is not measured by power alone, but by the ability to understand, inspire, and guide others with wisdom, respect, and courage. The sun rose higher, casting golden light across the road ahead. Harrington walked with purpose, ready for the next mission, but carrying with him the satisfaction of a journey well completed. The palace, once just a place of walls and rules, had become a living testament to the power of calm authority, insight, and the quiet courage to act wisely. And so, the Royal Marine officer who had shocked the king's guards with unexpected visits became more than a visitor. He became a symbol of thoughtful leadership, a reminder that true strength lies in understanding, and that the influence of one determined and wise individual can echo far beyond their presence.